In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to make the column that you can see on the screen now. We'll go through some different methodologies of creating the column using some 2D and 3D machining toolpathing, as well as how to get your clip art to wrap around the column itself. But in order to do that, we actually need to look at a file. So let's go ahead and go to File and Open. So this is the file that I've already set up earlier. Let's have a look at the job dimensions for this. So if we go up to the top left here in the software and click on this option for job setup menu, you can see it's a rotary job with a length of 18 inches and a diameter of 2.5 inches. My units are of course in inches. I'm Z0ing off the cylinder axis to try and get a more accurate cut here because I'm not sure if the material is perfectly round, so I'm going to go for the cylinder axis as opposed to cylinder surface. The XY datum is in the bottom left. The orientation in my case is along X. If you're unsure, do have a look at your CNC machine or indeed contact your machine manufacturer and they'll be able to let you know which way your orientation is on your CNC if you're not sure. And you can see here I've got my modeling resolution set to very high, and my material in this case for the appearance is Canadian maple. So let's just click OK for that. And I'm just going to unwrap the view for the moment. So you can see here I've got a bunch of guidelines I've already set up along with some vectors that I've drawn in line with those guides. So I used the guides to set up some of these drawing aspects for myself earlier. And you can see I've got a model here that I've got wrapping around the job currently. If I just move this around, you can see it's currently wrapping all the way around. So let's just pop that back into the flat view there. And what we're going to have a look at now is setting up some more of the file to create our spiral column wraparound clip art. And just for organization purposes, I have got my layers at the top here organized. So I've got my tabs, or where my tabs are going to be on one layer. So if I click on this, you'll see where they are currently. So you see at the very ends, they turn off and on. My coves, which are just beyond the first tab on the left here. So just in this area here, you'll see if I turn them back on, here are our cove areas. So there's vectors for the coves. We've got the flutes, which are just down here. So that'll be an area for fluting. And then finally we have our components, which is this layer just here. Now there's no vectors currently on the components layer, but just thought I'd point that out because if we do end up putting any vectors on that layer, that's where we can put them. But it's nice and organized here in the file. And also if I pop over to the left, over to components, you notice I've got wrapped components. So I've got my shell molding, which is this model just here under its own level. And I have a zero plane as well, which is in the background here. You can see that nice and clear. Okay, so let's now have a look at drawing in some lines to help aid our wrap spiral. So the space in which we're going to be drawing is this area here. So this guideline here, where I'm hovering my mouse currently, and this guideline here. And this is why the guidelines come in handy to help you to draw some of your vectors out. Now, in my case, I need to make the vector, in this case, twice the length of Y. So this is my Y value, top to bottom here of my worksheet. And the reason is because I'm going to use a clip art that is going to wrap around the column twice. So I need twice the length. So let's just zoom out just a little bit so we can see our worksheet from a larger view here because the line is going to be quite long. So I want you to be able to see it. And the first thing I'll do is I'll go over to the left and click on this tool here, the Draw Polyline tool. And I'm going to click at the very bottom using this guideline. And that is why the guideline comes in handy. So I've got my point there snapped, ready to go. And in this case, I'm going to use an angle of 90. And I'm actually going to use a length value here. And what I'm going to do is put in Y times 2. Now before I hit equals on the keyboard, you should know that what this will do is it's telling the software to take the value of Y here and multiply it by 2. So you're using the software to the advantage here. So you don't have to remember the value if you don't need to. You can always just put in Y or X to use some formula here. So I'll press equals and that gives me the value there. And then I can click on add. And that has now added in my line. You can see here, at the top here, it's highlighted it in red. I've got my line going from top to bottom, which is twice the length of Y. So that's my first line done here to create for my spiral. And now what I need to do is draw the line that will align the actual clip art to. So with us still in the create line tool, I'm actually going to click just down here. I'm just going to delete these values out for the moment so we don't actually need those. And I'm just going to click on this guideline down here in the bottom left. Again, this is why guidelines are so useful, and I'm going to click onto this point when it snaps to it just up here. Wonderful. And now I have my line which will help me guide the clip art, which we'll be looking at in just a moment. So first I'm actually going to come up and turn over to the 2D view just now, so we'll have a look at that. So If you follow my mouse pointer over to the left, we're going to follow it over to the tabs here. We're going to come down to clipart. Now, I have downloaded some clipart here from my V&Co portal account, so you will have some of these clipart available to you depending on the software that you have purchased. You'll be able to download these from your V&Co account. Now, what we're going to go into is the decorative option here, and we want this option just down here, which is called Flourish 220A. So I'm just going to left mouse click and drop that onto my worksheet. Wonderful. So there's our flourish. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit because I'm going to place this in the bottom left hand corner. So I'm going to left mouse click in the middle here and just drag that over, and that will snap the middle of that to the bottom left hand corner of my worksheet. And the reason I did that is because this is going to be a great location to measure from. When I hover my mouse in the bottom left here, keep an eye on the bottom right of the software just down here. Now you notice where I'm hovering my mouse currently is giving me some X and Y values, and if I put it over the bottom point here, it says X0, Y0. So it's a great location to measure off of. And the reason we're going to measure off of that location is because I'm going to now drag out another copy of one of these clipart files, but I want to see how close it is in relation to the edge of this one. And the reason for that is when I come to wrap these around the actual column itself, I need the edge of one of these flourishes to meet up or be underneath or as close as possible to the edge of this one. So it looks nice and clear and there's no big gaps in between them. So with that in mind, let's hold the Alt key and on our keyboard, and we'll left mouse click into the center of this current clipart. I'm just going to drag that out, and I'm going to see where the edge lines up with this one in a nice way. Now, if you look in the bottom right where I was hovering my mouse pointer earlier, you can see I've got a value of 4.5825. We can round that up to 4.86. So, sorry, to 4.6. So I think 4.6 is going to be the value I'm using here because it gives a very tiny gap, but nothing where there's anything overlapping too much. So I think that's a pretty good value. So 4.6. So let's note that down somewhere. So I've got 4.6 written down next to me at the moment. And with that 4.6 value in mind, we're going to use that in just a moment to create a bunch of copies of this. We need 6 of these because we're going to wrap it around twice. So let's hover our mouse back up to the top left to go to design. And we're going to come down to one of the copying tools here. And with this case, we're going to use the array copy tool under offset and layout. Now, in my case, I only want one of these or row of one of these. And I want 6 in X. So in Y, I want 1, and in X, I want 6. Now the type of spacing I'm going to be using here is an offset. Now if you recall, the value we wrote down earlier in X was 4.6. That's why we noted it down, because we need to know the offset for this value in X, and for the Y it's going to be 0. We do need to make sure this option at the bottom is checked here to group our copies. We want them to be grouped together, so when we come to manipulate them and edit them and move them around, they'll be grouped together so they'll move all together. Okay, so let's click on Group Copies, and we can click on Copy. And then wonderful, we can close out the form. We now have, if I just zoom out just a little bit, our 6 copies ready for use. Now we're actually going to align this or the set of copies of clipart are with this line just here. So to do that, let's click on our grouped copy. You'll notice that the handles are around the entire set because we've grouped them. And I'm going to press 0 or 9 on the keyboard to rotate this object twice. We're going to make it vertical. And I'm just going to drag this out over to the right hand side here. And this is now set up so we can now have a look at placing this for the right angle. So to get this clipart onto this line to be the right size and the right angle, we can use a tool over here called the Dimensions tool, which is just up here under Create Vectors. Now if I click into this, you'll notice I've got various different ways I can measure dimensions. I'm going to go for length first at the top here. And the first dimension I need is this one for this line here, this angled line here. So I'm going to see how long this is by clicking on the bottom left at the start of the line and the top right at the end of the line. And now you'll notice I have my dimension popping out from here, and I can just left mouse click to place it. And this little box in the middle there says 17.2 there. So 17.2 is the length of that line. But I also need the angle because I need to place this at the right angle. So let's click on the angle dimension over in the Dimensions tool. And I'm going to click on this part just here. So left mouse click here using the guideline. Then at the bottom, and then one more here just at this point here, and that will give us our angle. So I can just drag this out, you can see here, and I can just click on here, and then you can see we've got 24 degrees. So we've got our numbers now to help us place our clip art. So I'll close out the dimensions tool form, and we can now look at placing our clip art. So if I click on the clip art just here, what I can do is first use this value for the length here to get the right length of the clip art. So 17.2, so let's come over to the left and click on set selected object size, and I've got my clip art selected here. Now in Y, I'm actually going to change this from 28.772 to 17.2 as we've got from our dimensions just here. So I can click on apply. So that now changes it to the right length. And then I can now adjust the angle. And to do that, we need to make sure our clip art is selected again. So I'll drag that into view. And we'll use this option here called rotate selected objects. Now I'm going to make sure that the type of rotation is relative and the angle is going to be minus 24. Okay, so we get the 24 from this here. We're going to do minus, and we'll do it from the middle here. So we'll make sure that the middle point is the pivot point here, and we'll click apply. And that will now put it to the right angle that we need. We can click on close. And again, click on my clip art, hover my mouse over the middle point, and I'll drag it into place. And you should notice that when I put the middle over the middle of that middle line, it snaps to it as well. So now we've got our clip art ready and set up to use. So with everything set up, I'm going to click on F on the keyboard to bring everything into view here. And I'm going to actually tile my views here so you can see the 3D view and the 2D view. So you notice here in the 3D view, currently you can see that the design is wrapped around once. And if I pop on the wrapped view, you'll notice it's gone around here, but it seems to stop here. Now, why is that? Well, I'll actually show you why that actually occurs. So let's just go back to the flat view for a moment. If we go over to the components tab on the left-hand side here, we need to put our flourish into its own level. So let's do that first. So let's click on wrapped components with the right mouse click, and we'll choose insert new level. And we're going to, on level 2 here, right click and put rename level. And we're going to call this one spiral component. And that is now taking effect. So I'm just going to drag my flourish into that level there. And now if I right mouse click onto this spiral component, you'll notice there's an option here that says wrapping. Now pay attention to the 3D view and the 2D view and to what happens when I actually click on wrapping. Now you notice this time the actual design has now gone over twice, so it's actually wrapped around twice. And if I turn on my wrapped view here, you'll see that it's actually wrapped around the spiral now as we intended. It's done it twice. So just something to look out for, that if you're ever creating a wrapped design and you're noticing that it isn't going around it when it should be doing so, make sure that in your component properties you make sure that you set up that your level is set to actually be wrapping. Okay, so in your components, make sure your level is set to wrapping. Otherwise, you will see effectively this where it's only wrapped around once. So it's only showing you the component currently on the worksheet here, and anything off the worksheet hasn't been respected. But if you choose the wrapping mode, it will now respect anything off of the worksheet and now wrap it around back onto our spiral here. Okay. So with that covered, let's just go back into the 2D view, because now we're going to have a look at adjusting some further 3D content. So let's press F on the keyboard to bring everything back into view. Okay, so what we'll need to do first is go over to the clip art tab on the left here, and we'll need to choose this option here for 3D tabs. And in 3D tabs, we'll need this one at the top here in the middle called circular underscore 0.5.v3m. I'm just going to left mouse click and drag it onto my worksheet. And we'll zoom in, and I'll hover my mouse over the middle point, and we'll drag that over to the left here and snap it onto this line. Wonderful. Now I'm going to press 9 on the keyboard twice to rotate this, so it's in line with that line. Great. And I can now drag this to the very bottom of this worksheet, just there. And I'm going to left mouse click on the handle at the top here, so I can drag it to the very top of my worksheet as well. So just drag that all the way to the top. There we go. And if I tile my views now, so if I go for 2D and 3D view, you can see here it's on my 3D view, and I'll address this kind of lip here in just a moment. Just like we did earlier with the shell, we can address that as well by adjusting the height if we need to. I'm just going to make sure that everything's lined up. So looking fine at the bottom there, and you can see there's a little bit of a gap at the top there, so I can adjust that nice and easy. Okay, now we do need to put this on its own level. So let's go over to the Components tab on the left. We'll right mouse click and we'll choose Insert New Level, and we'll right mouse click that new level and choose Rename Level. I'm going to call this one Wrapped Component 2, and we're going to left mouse click on our circular component and we're going to pop it into that level. Great. And we can now have a look at adjusting our model. So first thing I want to actually adjust is the height of this in Z. Now I like the height of my shells here, so I'm just going to use the shells as the information to inform the height of my circular tab. So if I left mouse click this in 3D view, you'll notice I've got this option here which is to adjust the shape height, and it's telling me that the shape height for the shell is currently 0.2547 or 0.25 rounded down. So I'm going to use that as my base value, and I'm going to click on to my tab, and I'm going to make this one instead of 0.125, I'm going to go for 0.15, so just a little bit slower, a little bit lower than the one I've got over here, so it doesn't look too overbearing. So I can press enter to adjust that height, and you'll see it'll take effect here as well. And I'm also going to adjust the width of this object here as well. So if I go to the Design tab, click on Set Selected Object Size in the Transform Objects, and I haven't got Link XY checked this time, or Auto Scale Z, because I want to adjust the width and the height separately. I want them to be independent of each other. So I'm going to go for a width of 0.75 and I'll hit apply. Wonderful, that looks a little bit thicker and better, and I'll adjust my height to 7.9, hit apply. Great, and so I've adjusted those values now to something I'm happy with. And then finally you'll notice that I've got this problem here where I've got the model of my spiral going onto my tab. So how do I adjust that? Well, if you go over to the Components tab and we right mouse click onto our Wrapped Component 2 level, currently the Combine mode is set to Add. That means anything will be added to it. What we need to do is set it to Merge. So when I select Merge, you notice that now merges into that, nice and smooth, and that looks great. So we can look like we've got everything almost ready for setting up our toolpathing. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we have another copy of our tab here for this side on this vector over here. That's why we made it earlier. So while holding Control and Alt on my keyboard, I will left mouse click into the center of this component. I will drag it over till it snaps onto that one there. Wonderful, you can see it make the change in the 3D view there as well. Crucially, you'll notice that the spiral has merged into our component here, and it hasn't gone on top of it because it is under that same level over here, which means they are both merged. Okay, so we've now got both of our ends all sorted out, ready to go, and we can now have a look at making some toolpathing. So I'm just going to maximize my 2D view, press F on the keyboard, everything's in central view now, so now we can have a look at some toolpaths. So to do that, let's hover our mouse over to the top left here and click on this icon here to move across to the toolpath menu. And the first thing we need to do is check our material setup. So let's click onto the Set button on the top right here. Now our diameter is 2.5, which is what we set up in the job setup earlier. The XY date on the bottom left. The Z0, the cylinder of the axis, because we don't know if our material is smooth all the way around. So to get a more accurate cut, we'll use the center of the cylinder. As for the model position in material, we actually want to make sure there's no gap outside here, so I've put this all the way to the top, but I will need to memorize this number here, 0.2547. And the reason I need to memorize this number is because with our 3D toolpaths, we're going to be removing some material. So we need to know the thickness of our model, so when we come to do some of our 2D toolpaths, we don't affect some of the model toolpathing. As for my rapid Z gap above material, I've put 0.5 and 0.5. These are safe and sound for my machine, but do make sure they are safe and sound for your machine. So make sure that you check what the value should be for your particular machine if you need help with that. You can always talk to your machine manufacturer, and the same applies here for the Z gap above material. So make sure you're clearing any clamps or any hold downs that you may be using with this design. I'm just going to click OK because I'm now ready to set up my first toolpath, which will be my roughing toolpath. In fact, I'm just going to pop over to the 3D view and we can have a look at this flat, and we can have a look at now taking our roughing toolpath for a spin. So let's click onto 3D roughing toolpath. Now in this case, I'm going to use the model boundary, and the tool I'm going to use is a 1/4 inch end mill. Now these are settings that are safe and sound for my particular machine. So again, double check these settings for yourself. If you're using a different tool or indeed an end mill, make sure that they're appropriate for your particular setup. Okay, and I'll be using the model boundary, as I said earlier. I won't be using a boundary offset, but I will use a machining allowance of 0.03. I'm just going to leave a little bit of material for the finishing toolpath to clean up. And then for the roughing strategy, I'm going to use Z level. And the profile is set to profile last, and the order is to do it level by level. As for raster angle, I don't need to adjust that, or the ramp plunge moves, but I will call this one 3D roughing, and I will put the name of the tool in, so 0.25 inch end mill, and I'll click calculate. So let's just wrap that and have a look at what it looks like in the preview. So you can see here currently it's got the cylinder ready to be cut, and you can see the blue areas are the toolpathing areas. So let's click on preview to have a look at what that looks like, and you'll notice that the software has first flattened the design out, then wrapped it. So that is actually what will happen with this. In this case, it is that the software thinks this is a flat design and machines it as such, and a post processor, when you save this out with a wrapped rotary post processor, that will actually wrap the axis, in this case the y axis in my case, to make it into a wrapped rotary job. I'm happy with how that looks because that is how roughing path should look. It's rough and it's making sure there's some material left behind for the finishing to clean up. And speaking of our finishing toolpath, let's have a look at it. So let's go back up to the top here and click on 3D finishing toolpath. Now this time I will again use a model boundary, but I'm using a smaller tool. I'm using an 1/8 inch ball nose tool. Now again, the settings are safe and sound for my particular setup. Again, do double check these for your setup, so when you come to machine a design on Rotary, make sure your tooling and your settings for it are appropriate. Now in this case, I'm actually going to use a raster strategy, and I'm going to keep the angle at 0 degrees, and I will put the tool in here again. So I'll put a dash and I'll put 1/8 and then BN for ball nose, so I know nice and clear which tool it is. So when I go to cut this out, I know exactly which toolpath it is. Click calculate, and the software takes just a moment to calculate the toolpath, and you can see here in blue these are the toolpath lines here ready to cut, and we can click on preview selected toolpath because that is the selected toolpath, and again the software unwraps it, does it as a flat job, and then we'll wrap it again, and you can see already the lovely detail we've got out of that finished toolpath there, looking nice and crisp. So our design is looking wonderful so far. I'm just going to click on top to put that back into central view. And now we can actually look at making the first of our 2D toolpaths on this design. I'm just going to close out the preview for the moment. I'm going to put this back to the flat view, turn on our vectors, and I'm going to select our fluting toolpaths as the next one. So these are the fluting vectors we've got here. You notice that I clicked on one of them and it selected all of them. That's because earlier I had grouped them together. In fact, while I'm at it, I can delete our dimensions here. We don't need those anymore. We can get rid of that. So let's just get rid of the dimensions there as well. Okay, so clicking on our fluting vectors, we're going to come over to the right hand side here and we're going to choose the fluting toolpath. Now you recall earlier I had made a note of the model size, or the model position and material, the model size or the thickness of it, and it was 0.2547. Now the reason I noted that down is because when we run our 3D toolpaths, the 3D toolpaths will machine away some material, and when we come to make our 2D toolpaths, we need to know what depth it went down to then machine on top of that new depth. In this case, it is 0.2547. And the depth I actually want to cut down to is 0.125. And the tool this time I'm going to use is actually a 1/2 inch ball nose. So a little bit of a bigger tool. Again, do double check these settings for yourself, but For me, these are safe and sound, so I'll click on select. And for the flute type, I actually want to ramp at the start and end. So I want the tool to come in, go along, then come back out again. And I want the ramp length to be 0.5 inches. I want it to be a smooth ramp type, so it's a nice smooth transition into the flute and back out again. And I will put the tool name, so I'll put ball nose, or rather 1/2 inch ball nose. So it's nice and clear as to which tool I'm using here, and click on calculate. So let's wrap that up again, and we'll click on the preview selected toolpath because we've got our fluting one selected. And you can see it machines it flat again, and you can see how nice of an effect we've got there with our flutes now. And that is a quite lovely looking column. So it's all coming together bit by bit. Now the next two toolpaths are going to use profile tooling. So I'm just going to make it flat again, and we'll turn back on our vectors. Now this time we're going to need to make our coves. So the vectors we need are, if I just close out the form here, we just need this one on the left here, and I'll hold shift and click that one on the right. So these are our cove vectors. And we're going to go to our profile tool, which is just up the top here. And this time we'll need to use our depth again because we removed that material as we discussed earlier, so 0.2547. And I'm going to go down by 0.1 of an inch. And in this case, the tool I'm going to use is a 1/2 inch ball nose. So click on select. And I want to machine on the vectors. I want to machine on the actual vector lines there. Don't need to worry about these settings here, but I will call this one profile coves, and I'll give it the 1/2 inch ball nose name so I know nice and clear which tool it is. So let's click on calculate. And let's preview that selected toolpath. So let's click on preview, and there you go, machined it flat, and there you can see the effect there, a really nice cove effect we've got on the ends here. And then finally, we just need to create some tabs. So again, we're going to go back into the flat view, turn on our vectors, and for our tabs, we're going to use this vector at the end here on the very right hand side. Just close out our preview, and on the very left hand side, so we've got those vectors selected. We'll go back into the profile toolpath again, 0.2547 because we've already machined some of the material away with the 3D toolpath. Now this time I want to go down 0.5 of an inch, but because I've already removed this material, I need to work out how to do that. So what I can do is put 0.5 because that's how far I want to go down, but then do minus 0.2547 equals, and then that will give me the actual amount I need to go down to achieve a 0.5 depth. So you can use the software to your advantage here to help you do that. Now in this case, I'm going to change the tool to a 1/2 inch end mill, and I'm going to keep it to machine on the vectors, and this one I'll call profile tabs, and then 1/2 inch end mill, nice and clear as to what tool I'm using. Click on calculate, and we can have a look at what that looks like. So let's preview that. And then we have our tab, so you can come to cut this off when it comes to machining, and you can see our completed column looks lovely. You can see how we use a lot of different methodologies to achieve a really cool looking design, and how we mix 3D and 2D toolpath elements to help make our column really shine. Now that brings us to the end of our video, but at this stage what you can do is actually save off your toolpaths. And there is a linked video below titled Introduction to Wrap Rotary in Vectric Software, which is a video that shows you how to create rotary text, but more importantly, it shows you how to save off your toolpaths in a rotary manner. So it explains why a rotary post-processor is important. So I highly recommend you check out that video as well. And of course, we need to save our design. So let's go to File, Save As, and we'll call this one Create a Column. And then wonderful, we've saved that out, ready for future, and we can use that again. I do hope you've thoroughly enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed making it, and of course we look forward to seeing you in the next video.